Okay, good morning, eighth grade. We're going to talk today about the presidential election of 1860. This is the election where Abraham Lincoln is going to be able to claim victory, and in doing so, going to change the sort of fortune of this country forever. Um, there are a lot of people out there who believe that Abraham Lincoln is too much of an abolitionist to ever become president and therefore maintain that balance that has been um, going on for so long. This balance between free and slave. A lot of people think that Abraham Lincoln would disrupt that, and they're rightly so. Abraham Lincoln was very open about his opinions about slavery and what he would plan to do if he would ever become president. So, how exactly did he win the election, even though he would not get any support in the South, and in many states he was unpopular as well. So, what exactly had to happen for Abraham Lincoln to become president? So, here's the thing about the 1860 presidential election. Probably no other election since, or really even before it, carried more weight for the United States. For a nation standing at the brink of civil war, a nation where about 4 million people lived in bondage and forced servitude, a nation whose entire economic system lay threatened by its outcome. The election of 1860, was the United States at sort of the edge of an uncertain future. So let's take a look at the candidates for the presidential election because this is kind of where um, the story really takes shape because in most presidential elections in this country, you hear about two candidates, right? In modern times, you hear about a Republican candidate and a Democratic candidate. In our country, we've sort of established what's known as the two-party system, and for a long time, that's served us well. There are some years where you hear about a third-party candidate who gains popularity, but really it comes down to just two candidates. So, how in 1860 was there four candidates? Let's take a look at who those were. First, the Republican Party candidate, Abraham Lincoln. You guys can recall the Republican Party was put together, established just a few short years before the 1860 election. This comes from a lot of Northern Whigs and Free Soilers, the political party that was um, focused on abolishing slavery. These people came together and they formed the Republican Party, and they did pretty well in the previous years, the previous presidential election. Um, but now they're going to come out with their heavy hitter, Abraham Lincoln. Who at this point, he was mainly known for being a well-respected lawyer in Illinois. He served one term in U.S. House of Representatives for Illinois, but he'd never really gained any national fame until those famous debates that he did with Stephen A. Douglas during the 1858 Illinois Senate race. You guys have already seen the video. You guys see how you know passionate both men were in their delivery and their views. And again, they drew large crowds, and a lot of people talked about it, and a lot of press wrote stories about it. So all of a sudden, Abraham Lincoln, has made a name for himself, and people know who he is. So this is a very good move by the Republican Party to nominate him because not only is he staunchly against slavery, but he is a well-spoken and well-determined man. Next, we have Stephen A. Douglas. So here we have another guy that you guys should be pretty aware of. So we saw Stephen A. Douglas debate Abraham Lincoln in the 1858 Illinois Senate race. He won that Senate race. Okay, so he is the senator from Illinois. Now, what makes him a good candidate, right? Well, he was the one who came up with the Kansas-Nebraska Act. He came up with this idea of popular sovereignty, that the people should decide for themselves whether or not they want to be a free state or a slave state. And a lot of people, really like that idea. But the thing was that he was not the only candidate for the Democratic Party. Okay, when the Democrats were selecting a nominee and Stephen A. Douglas was chosen, there were a lot of delegates from the southern states who did not like that choice. So they, in fact, broke off and they nominated their own candidate. So Stephen A. Douglas is, in fact, the northern Democratic candidate. And the southern Democratic candidate was a man named John Breckinridge. Um, Not a lot of information, is usually. I mean, he's not very, well talked about. Um, he was vice president under James Buchanan, president right before Abraham Lincoln, a Kentucky native, and he wanted the right to own slaves to be protected in the territories. Um, he did enters for a federal slave code. So he was a defender of this institution of slavery. So again, the South is looking for somebody to, uphold um, what they believe is their right to own slaves, or, in their view, own property. But this was not the last of them. Okay? The Constitutional Union, which was a party shortly put together before all this, um, they nominated a man named John Bell. He was a senator from Tennessee, a wealthy slave owner, okay, and he was also a defender of slavery. So we have two candidates here who are staunch defenders of the practice of slavery. We have one candidate who believes that states should choose for themselves if they want to be free or slave. And then we have a candidate who believes in the outright abolitionist of um, all slavery throughout the country. So, what we're talking about here, the stakes are pretty high. Okay. Um, so, let's talk a little bit about the issues here. Um, so, the issues on the minds of Americans in 1860, they were pretty varied. Some still in the political arena today. Political debates usually cover things like the preservation of the Union, not geared towards a civil war, keeping us together. Um, this is something that you guys saw in the video. If you guys watched the video, Stephen A. Douglas said that, this country could be forever divided, half free and half slave. Because, he sees, oh, we could keep going on being half and half, and, everybody do their own thing, and we'll go on living as a happy country. And Abraham Lincoln said, famously, a house divided against itself cannot stand. You know, we cannot be divided on this issue our, entire life as a country. Um, so that was a big issue. The rights of states, okay, that was all. This is pretty much masked as a issue of slavery. Then they also talked about things like the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad. That was something Stephen A. Douglas brought up a lot. The rights of immigrants. Okay, but as I said, the principal issue was the clash of over slavery and its expansion, specifically its expansion into the western, mostly unsettled territories. So for the voters of 1860, this was not merely an issue of human rights. Okay, the economic system based on slave-grown cotton not only controlled the South but the entire United States and reached across the ocean as well. For 4 million enslaved Americans who could not share their voice by the vote, the outcome of this issue and the election meant hope for a life of freedom. So, a few facts here, going in. Um, as I said before, Lincoln did not have many supporters in the South, if any, in fact. They were so against Lincoln even being considered a candidate for president because of his views of abolishing slavery that they refused to put him on the ballot in southern states. So in most states, Abraham Lincoln, um, most states in the South, Abraham Lincoln wasn't even a choice that you could mark off on a ballot. Uh, as I said before, the Democratic Party divided between northern and southern factions. All right, that's going to become a key factor in the outcome here. People living in the territories could not vote, so those who were living in the Kansas and Nebraska territories during this time did not have that privilege just of yet. Right, only when they became an official state could they cast their vote for president. For the first time in U.S. history, the original 13 states controlled less than 50% of the electoral vote. Okay, so we're talking about the 13 colonies that became states. All right, our country has expanded beyond a point where those 13, don't even make up a majority of the popular vote anymore. Now we'll talk a little bit about what this electoral vote means because that definitely plays a big part in the outcome. And then finally, slave states counted 3/5 of their enslaved population when determining the number of electoral votes. Okay, you can recall this from the Three-Fifths Compromise. So this meant more votes for the states, even though the opinions of these people were not represented. So they were counting their slave population as 3/5. They were counting it towards their representatives, even though these representatives, all right, did not represent these people. They did not represent, um, you know, even 3/5 or anything of these people. So it became a big deal in places like Virginia, all right, where a third of the population was enslaved. So these people who are counted towards representation are not exactly having their views expressed because they have no freedoms in the first place. All right, so let's talk about. All right, so here is an electoral map. All right, I'll explain exactly what all the colors and all the numbers mean in just a sec. Um, so just to break down the sort of the poll data that I was able to cobble together here. So in 1860, the population of the United States was around 31.5 million people. Approximately half of that number met the age of requirement to vote, but women and in most states minorities were excluded. So that right, um, that those amendments granting women and other minorities the ability to vote has not yet been passed. So they're still excluded from that privilege. Around 6.9 million, or just fewer than 45% of the age eligible population, had the option to represent the nation at the polls. On November 6, 1860, 81% of eligible voters, all right, compared with just 57.5% in 2012, cast their ballot for President of the United States of America. So the large majority of people who could voted ended up voting. All right, compared to today, you can't convince people to leave their house to vote anymore. So there was not yet a national standard for voting qualifications and requirements. Everything varied state by state. Um, they a lot of people say, it depended on race, depended on gender, depended on age, depended on if you were considered to be of sound mind, if you were in the military or not. So every state sort of had their own requirements and eligibilities that you had to meet in order to cast your vote. So in 1860s is pretty interesting. The polling, place operated differently than it does today. Obviously, you guys are still of, a young age where you haven't been able to cast your vote, but when you do, you'll know that it's not run exactly like this. So voting men would receive a paper ticket for the party of their choice, and on election day, the official would announce each vote out loud before placing it in the ballot box. Rather than voting for individuals, a man would be voting for the entire list of candidates from that party, from the local to national level. Now, obviously, the public nature of the voting process left room for corruption. So, Imagine your boss standing at the polling place to hear if you voted for his candidate. Um, so there was a lot of, people threatening one another. Okay. So it wasn't like the secret ballots that are done today. We go into booths and we are, you know, in a private situation where nobody's looking over our shoulder, um, or peeking at what we're doing, and we can, you know, um, in a pretty profound and confident way, cast a vote for who we think should, be chosen for office. So, so let's get back to the map here. All right. I got a couple other maps I'm going to show you guys, but we'll start out with this one. So again, we have four candidates. You guys can already tell there's 4 or 5 different colors. So the gray represents the territories. All right, people living there, obviously, as I said before, are not yet a state. Therefore, they don't have the privilege enough to vote yet. All right. Um, so the numbers, okay, those are electorals. Okay. So in order to determine how many electoral votes each state has, you add up the number of representatives it has. Okay, so that's how many congressmen it has plus how many senators it has. So if you look at Ohio, all right, back in 1860, all right, we had 23 electoral votes. Okay, so to get that, that meant we had 21 members of Congress from Ohio, and then we had 2 senators. So, for instance, if you looked at Michigan, they had 6 electoral votes. So that means minus 2 senators, they had 4 men in Congress. All right. So in Ohio, as you guys know, Ohio was heavily settled, um, being the prize of the Northwest Territories. So we had a very very large population. All right, and that's how you determine the number of representatives. You guys can recall from that great compromise. All right, how many representatives the state gets equals how many people it has. So that means the states with the larger populations have the more representatives. All right, so here we have New York, Pennsylvania, and Ohio, really the largest of all of them. Today that's obviously a little bit different. New York is still very large. Out of all of these, we have California with 4. Today, it would be like somewhere in the 50s. Um, they have Today they have the largest state population, so they have the most amount of electoral votes. But back then, only 4. Okay, so what do all these numbers mean? What do you do? Well, when a state votes for its candidate, and if a candidate wins the majority vote in that state, they win the entire state and they win that state's electoral votes. So as you can see here, Lincoln, he pretty much carried the North, okay, including the western states here, Oregon and California. He carried the North. Um, Stephen A. Douglas, okay, he didn't win much. He got New Jersey. Um, John Bell, he got what will later called border states. And then Breckinridge, okay, who was the Southern Democrat candidate, he pretty much carried all of the southern states, the Cotton Belt, okay, those that highly, you know, um, relied upon slave labor. All right, so obviously, I'm not going to be voting for anybody like Abraham Lincoln. All right, so when you win that state, then you win those electoral votes and you add them up. Okay, now usually it's first person to 270. But in this case, we have 4 candidates, right? So 270 to win if you had 2 candidates, but we have 4. All right. So these are a few infographics here, kind of breaking down the results of the election, because this is going to explain exactly how Abraham Lincoln was able to win. Yeah, he won a lot of states, as you guys can call. Again, looking at the bottom map here, all right, he won a lot of states, but he also lost a lot of states. All right, he did. Um, the entire South, the border states, these are a lot of states that he lost. All right, but it all comes down to electoral votes. All right, so there might be more people in these states that have voted against them, but if you look in terms of just electoral votes, he picked up the three largest electoral states. He picked up New York, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. He won those three states. And then all the other states, again, you put them all together, and he won a total of 180 electoral votes. The next, second place, John Breckinridge, okay, the Southern Democrat, he won a total of 72. Okay, John Bell came in third. He won a total of 39 electoral votes, and then Stephen A. Douglas, right, he won a total of 12. But look at the difference between John Bell and Stephen A. Douglas, and this kind of helps me prove my point here. So in the third column here, all right, it's under electoral votes, you see how many votes they got. Okay, I don't know if I can. Oh, I was trying to paint something there. Yeah, you guys can see it. Electoral votes. Okay, so um, again, looking at John Bell and Stephen A. Douglas. Okay, so John Bell won total 39 over Stephen A. Douglas's 12. Okay, you think, oh well, he crushed him. Well, if you look at popular vote, it tells a different picture. Or it tells a different story. Okay, popular vote meaning total number of people that voted for you. All right, total number of people that voted for you. So Stephen A. Douglas absolutely crushed John Bell in the popular vote. John Bell got 592,000 versus Stephen A. Douglas's 1.3 million. Okay, so how did Stephen A. Douglas end up with less electoral votes? Again, it all has to come down with electoral math. Okay, now John Bell, he might have, again, he won Tennessee, Kentucky, Virginia, um, those states, and is that it? I thought there was one more. Yeah, that was it. Okay, so he won those three. All right, and when you add them up, okay, so 12 plus 12 plus 15, that's 39. All right, so that's a good amount of people. But you look at um, things like what Stephen A. Douglas won. Okay, in New Jersey, he picked up a lot. All right, there's a lot of people living in New Jersey. There's a lot of people living in Missouri. More people living in there, okay, than those three other states. But again, they just added it up, having larger electoral or larger electorals. Okay, so it really comes down to winning electorals, not winning the popular vote. Because here's the thing, right? If the Democrats decided not to split up, okay, if they decided to accept Stephen A. Douglas, or if they decided just to go with John Breckinridge, either one, if there was just one Democratic candidate and we had maybe three candidates in this race, Abraham Lincoln never would have won. He never would have won. If you add up the popular votes, okay, the electoral votes, okay, he could have he could have seemingly lost. All right. If you add up John Bell's, okay, he could have lost the popular vote. He could have lost. Well, he did pretty much. He only got 40% of the popular vote, but he could have lost had these Democrats not split the ticket. So you know, it's pretty crazy to think about it. Time in America, if Abraham Lincoln did not win those, if again Stephen A. Douglas, maybe he would have run. You don't know if Pennsylvania or New York, they would have went for him. Again, it's a strange thing to think about, but we could have had a history where Abraham Lincoln was never elected. But thankfully, the Democrats decided to split, so it became North and Southern, and in doing so, basically lost them the election. Thought we have a lot to thank for that one. So, with all the results tallied, Abraham Lincoln declared the winner, the next president. Okay. The big question is, would the South accept it? Again, I said the South did not even put him on the ballot. Okay. The South hated the idea of Abraham Lincoln, a staunch abolitionist, even being considered a candidate for president of the United States. But here he has won. How is the South going to react? Well, a few weeks after the election, South Carolina secedes from the Union. they declare their independence. They are no longer part of the United States. All right, and they're not going to be the only ones. Okay, all those other southern states that voted for John Breckinridge, they're going to follow suit as well. They're going to secede. All right, and what we're going to see is them establishing their own country, their own constitution, electing their own president, and through a series of events, okay, we'll find ourselves at war with this new country in the South. And this will be our Civil War. So, what ultimately tipped the scales? Again, it was always an important thing to maintain the balance, but the thing that ultimately tipped the scales in favor of the free states and upset the slave states so much they decided to break away from the Union was the election of Abraham Lincoln as president. So, the election of 1860 is a pretty important one. It's also a fascinating one because it's very unique with the men involved and with the outcome. All right, so we'll talk a little bit more about obviously what's to follow here. Um, we'll talk exactly how um, war gets declared. All right, the events surrounding that. So if you guys have any other questions, feel free to comment. Feel free to email, message me on Mono. All right, make sure you guys are going to your Zoom classes, getting your assignments done, turned in. All right, and that's it for me. Thank you.